I was a science fiction fan before a Bob Dylan fan. And this may not surprise you to find out that I wrote for fanzines. I ran a fanzine. I had a big collection. And one of the organizations I was a member of was the Philip K. Dick Society, which was a newsletter run by Paul Williams. So many decades later, he was to come and stay with me in London and Cambridge as a Dylan fan on the Never Ending Tour, but we went back further. So I've had this sort of need to express myself, and I ran fanzines before the book, and in the fanzines I was reviewing the shows I was at. That was very personal. By the time it grew into the book, as you've correctly said, and I'm very glad you like it for the reasons you said, because I mean, it was the greatest fun. It's the greatest fun in the world to travel around following Bob Dylan and meeting Bob Dylan fans. I mean, how much more fun can you pack into a life? So it was a wonderful time. And what I tried to do was keep my own experiences, because it is a very, very subjective experience, but at the same time, broaden it to say what it meant to that community at that time. You know, so it's particularly up until the turn into this century, a little bit longer than that, but particularly up until then, when I was touring, you know, a lot every year, and you were meeting the same people and then meeting new people. It was just great. Well, you know it yourself. It's just it's a buzz, isn't it? Well, I mean, during this time, I was going to work in a sort of a normal environment as well. And I did try to have these conversations with people. I think after about 12 years, I realized these were conversations best avoided. I don't think you really can. I don't think you really can. I mean, you could to somebody who's similarly obsessed by someone else, particularly a performer, to a degree. I think perhaps, but to ordinary people, you very soon, unfortunately, start to sound desperately unhinged, and they sort of eyes glaze over and they back away from you. You know, then when you meet another Dylan fan, of course, their eyes light up. You talk about the shows you've most liked, and then being Dylan fans, you very quickly got onto the shows that you've most disliked or disasters you've had getting to a gig or whatever. Yeah, Bob's completely embedded from the age of about 14. Bob's completely embedded in all my relationships. I mean, my parents had no choice but to be Dylan fans, you know. And thankfully, they liked him. I found out years later that my dad had actually been using John Wesley Harding, the track, for a lecture. He used to give English linguistics lectures, and he'd been using it for a lecture without telling me, simply because he'd heard it so often. You know, it was like he had it memorized. So I eventually took my parents to a show in 1989, actually, which was great. All my family I've been to many shows with my brother-in-law. My sister was there. My niece was at a show as a fetus. So, you know, the whole family has been going in. And of course, I met my wife because of Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan's just been part of my whole life. And if nobody's involved with Bob, I'm not going to talk to them or meet them, am I? I have to be a little bit boastful here and say I actually once won a writing competition for this, which was how I met my wife. And I'm sure everybody else exaggerated, but I won it without having to exaggerate it. Again, thanks to Bob. It's always thanks to Bob. I'd just gone to live in Finland, and I was going to a party in Helsinki, and there was two of us over from the UK, and my wife knew there was two people from the UK over, and one was a big Dylan fan, as she was and is. And so eventually, as the party moved around, I met her, and she said to me, "Oh, you're the Dylan fan then?" She'd met the other guy who was not a Dylan fan. So you're the Dylan fan then? And I said, "Yes. What's your favorite album, Blonde on Blonde or Blood on the Tracks?" And she paused for a minute and she looked at me and she said, "I'm not going to pick either of them because neither one of them deserve to be second to anything."
That's a good answer.
It's a great answer. That was in 1984. She's not been able to get rid of me since. I thought I'm staying with this one. I mean, I've tried the line on about 3,000 people all across Europe before then, but you know, eventually I got the answer. But I do think that Dylan fans tend to be very individualistic. And I think maybe it's one of the things Bob teaches us we should be very early on in life.
Yeah.
So I think we tend to be very individualist. And if I compare it to Bruce Springsteen, I've been to a lot of Bruce Springsteen shows. You know, I mean, to a normal person, I've probably been to an excessive amount, but of course, compared to Bob, hardly any. But you know, Bruce Springsteen fans tend to all get together. First of all, they tend to agree on what the good shows are. They tend to not bicker amongst themselves, and they tend to talk about the good shows, not the bad shows. You know, I love talking about when he was at Hammersmith and he turned his face into the mic and he hit the mic and he lost his temper. And it was great, you know. Whereas I'm not sure fans of other people do that quite so much. So I think it's partly the individual thing, But I think also Bob is such a different performer from everybody else. You know, as you know, when everybody listening to this, I expect that, you know, it's hardcore fans that listen to your podcast. But if there's any casual fans dropping in of other people, it's just not the same. I mean, Bob doesn't just change the songs night to night. He changes the chorus within each time he sings the song. He'll bend, he'll put a nuance on it, he'll change it. And of course, so there's all Bob's changes. And he challenges you. So unless you're up for the challenge, you know, a lot of times I don't like the shows, or don't like them as much. You have to put that in context. I'd still rather be a Dylan show that I don't like as much than any other show. But he challenges you, and if you're not up to it that night, you know, it could be a great show, and it's your fault. I mean, I remember in 1995 we were so spoiled in Europe. We had great show after great show. You know, I remember being a bit disappointed in Edinburgh. It's only because it became in between Glasgow and Dublin, which were even better, you know, there was Prague before that. And then he went to Brixton, and I remember saying, oh, the first night was really dull. And then about, I don't know, 3 months, I mean, the second show at Brixton was absolutely fabulous, the Thursday night show. But I remember about 3 months after the tour had finished, and I'd got all the CDs and all the upgraded tapes and everything, I thought, well, I'll better put that on and see if I was right to be disappointed. And Dignity came on, and it was absolutely jaw-droppingly good. I mean, it was just magnificent. And I had been at the show and not noticed. Now, there's 101 reasons why that could be. Somebody could have stood in my toe, somebody could have fallen over me, there could have been a fight in front. There's 101 reasons it could go wrong, could be in a bad mood, somebody could have shouted at you, you know, you could have had a good ticket at the front and landed up further back or something. Because we get very precious about being near the front, don't we? Oh, and I mean, seeing Bob's face, there's something I think makes a huge difference, an absolutely huge difference. And again, you know, if non-hardcore fans are listening in, they'll probably think this is either creepy or just insane. But I find it enormously different seeing him in these expressions than not. I realise it's very subjective. I mean, I still get people saying, you know, Andy Muir didn't like this show and it's my favourite, and I feel really bad. And it's I do try to, you know, get round that. Well, not get round it, but I do try to explain in advance in the book that this will happen, and please don't take it personally. And you know, I've changed my mind on shows, but it was, I mean, it is my never-ending tour, and I did say, as you say, that everybody has their own. Even people I'm very close to that have very similar tastes. We don't always agree. But you've thrown my answer a little bit here, because you've just said that you saw Bob twice. So I'm gritting my teeth so hard now that I might need medical help, because my jaw's going to break. Because this is actually the longest I've gone in my life since 1978. So since I was a teenager, it's the longest I've gone in my life without seeing Bob. The first time I heard the first line in Pay and Blood, I was a little bit bemused as to what Bob was actually doing. I'm not even, you know, other people joke about his voice. We love his voice, of course. You know, I think it's his greatest of all his gifts is his voice. But that first line in Pay and Blood, I still don't know why they didn't recut it, but that's Bob for you.
Yeah, I was just last night talking about on Twitter how in my own version of You, he sings "Not Fat Far to Walk," and they just left it.
I love that. It is great, isn't it? Yeah, it's all part of why we love him. But the worst one of all was I was in Paris working again. This was 97. It was now I'd seen Bob in Bournemouth the night before, and I'd gone back to Paris to work. And I was coming after a day's work in Paris. I was coming back to England to see Bob again in Bournemouth. And I left. I mean, I know you're saying I left it too late, but I left Paris in the morning. My boss at that time was actually a huge Buddy Holly fan, somebody who, you know, not Bob fan. I took him to one show, not a Bob fan at all, but could understand the obsession. And he arranged for us to leave very early so there wouldn't be a panic. I mean, we were talking about ridiculously early for the plane. And we got onto the motorway, onto the heading out to the airport, and there was a traffic jam that didn't move, and it didn't move for 3 hours. And when I say didn't move, I'm talking about we didn't move more than a few hundred meters in 3 hours. And the gig was beginning to look like I wasn't going to make it. We missed the plane. We got to the airport. My boss is a very frequent flyer and has got sort of the best connections in the airfield places. So he got us onto a plane, which might just about do it. Except, of course, I didn't have the right tickets or anything. Because he's got a sort of special pass, he could go on. So I had to desperately get my way through all the airport and onto the plane. But the plane was actually beginning, they were taking the steps off the plane, and I was still running across the tarmac. And this boss of mine, he's a very large man, and he stood in the door and he held onto the stairs so I could run up.
And you made it.
So I got on. Yes, I got on the plane, got to Heathrow. All the connections down to Bournemouth were gone though, so I had to get a taxi from Heathrow to Bournemouth. And the taxi driver at first quoted something like £300. I mean, you know, not only did I not have £300 on me, that's more than at that point you could take out of a bank machine. So I had to bargain him down to under what I could take out of the bank machine. And I got to the show only 15 minutes late. Now, the big thing about this is that Bob at that point was, I think he still does, he was always starting bang on time. So I thought, I've missed the first 15 minutes. Of course, I knew what the set list was probably going to be, so I'd even worked out the songs I'd missed. I burst through. I was wearing work clothes. I was carrying all my work equipment and everything. I burst through the doors, and just at that moment, Bob took the stage. He'd been delayed for 15 minutes.
Wow,
so I didn't miss even a nanosecond, almost a nanosecond. And the thing is, there's still people to this day who believe that I phoned ahead and said there was a security alert and delayed the start of it, and I didn't. No, I would have if I'd thought of it. In 1998, I pulled off probably my most audacious trip, because there was a World Cup, a football World Cup. That's the real football, by the way, Matt, you know, not the game you play over there, the real football. There was a football World Cup taking place in France, and I'm Scottish, as you may have guessed from the accent, and in those days Scotland qualified. So I actually went to see a Scotland game there, and tickets were really hard to come by. And I managed to, and flights were almost impossible, because my flights had also to include Bob, of course. So what I did was, I can't remember exactly how this worked out, but it involved Poland and Italy and Britain to get to France for the World Cup and Rotterdam to see Dylan in the shows where he was co-headlining with Van Morrison, because there weren't any direct flights anywhere. So again, I landed up running across a tarmac in France into a very small plane that was full of football celebrities, because I'd got this special ticket to get there. And that was exhausting, because that was 2 or 3 nights traveling with virtually no sleep. And, you know, I think I didn't have to go through Van, mind you. I just waited for the Bob bit, you know. Sorry, any Van fans either. First of all, there was a book called Razor's Edge, which went up to the end of last century. There's a little bit of 2000 in just as it was going through print, but that was all a little bit rushed. It really finished in 1999. So, but it did have 2000 when you started, nicely enough. And that was because there was a bookshop and a publication in Denmark Street, which is Britain's Tin Pan Alley. It's very small, but that is what we call it. Bob was there in the early 60s, sells guitars and everything. Anyway, this bookshop was a wonderful place to meet Dylan fans. I worked nearby, as it happens, and I used to be in the shop a lot, and they stocked my fanzine. And they'd read all my reviews of the shows, and it was them that said, would you like to write a book? I'd never thought of writing a book on it. It never occurred to me. I was writing the analytical stuff that you can't be bothered with. Quite right to. So they said, why don't you write a book on it? And I thought, what a great idea. I mean, I honestly don't think I'd ever have thought about it, but I thought, what a great idea, and what fun it will be to tie all these things together and talk to people and just do it. And of course, it was great fun. Now, about 2003, I think it was, possibly 2004, but I think 2003, Sean Bodie, who ran the place, asked for an update, and I thought he was too early, because there are so many Dylan books nowadays. It can't be the same now, surely. But in those days, every Dylan fan I knew bought every Dylan book, regardless of content or quality. I've still got them all. They've still got them all. We've also got them all alphabetically, chronologically arranged in our shelves, because that's the kind of people we are. And I've got hardback copies and paperback copies and annotated copies and signed copies. Anyway, I didn't think it would be fair for people to go out and buy the book with just 2 or 3 more years in it. It didn't seem right. But I had kept writing, because I'd started another fanzine by that point, and my life was still revolving around Bob. So I was still taking notes. And he put the seed in my mind that there would be another edition of it. And tragically, he contracted leukemia, even though he was a young man, a terrible disease that he battled as bravely as he could. But he was in and out of remission. I don't want to go into it, but in and out of remission, he would pick up the phone and he'd say, I still want to do this book. God's sake, rest. Would you just take a rest? But of course, it was good for him to have focus in his life as well. And he was doing things with other people. So about 2007 or something, 2006, 2007, he said it'll come out in 2008. And I actually stopped contacting him, because I knew he was ill, and I just thought it was wrong and he should be resting, and I didn't want to bother him with anything, basically. And tragically he died a bit later on. But the book, there was an advert for the book in 2008. Which came out by mistake. It was some computer algorithm or something, but it came out that the book was coming out. So I thought, oh my God, I better get a move on. So I wrote it up to 2008. But the 2007 and 2008, I mean, I'd lost the impetus. And I knew there'd be people out there that would be their first year of shows, or those would be their favorite shows. And why, it's just not fair for them to have to read that. And it was becoming repetitively saying, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. So I decided to put it off. And then I can't remember why it came out in 2012. It wasn't planned for 2012. It wasn't like, and if I'd known Tempest was coming out and it was going to be great shows, obviously I'd have postponed it. I think it was a point it'd been lying around and it was just a matter of putting it out. Oh, and I wanted it to end in quite a good thing. And strangely enough, and Peter Doggett was the same as me in this. I think I even quote him in the book about he went off the Never-Ending Tour at the same time as me. But like me, he liked, and close your ears, everybody out there, he really liked the Christmas album. And so did I. And I went to 2011 shows and I saw a show in Glasgow and a show in London that I really liked. And I thought, okay, I'll do it here. So that's why it's 2012. But it was a huge mistake. And I hope, that somebody fills in the gap, somebody who's been to loads and loads of shows. I think there's a book coming out, actually, 2011 to 2021, Matthew Ingate. Sorry if that name's wrong out there, but someone is bringing a book out. So doing my work for me.
No, I thought you were pretty fair in your critiques of about 2005 till 2010 or 11 era shows. It's not something that I like to almost accept because, like you, I'm so invested in Bob, and I try to be objective and compare it, fairly to past experiences and past performances. And the fact is, if Bob comes and plays near me, I'm going to go see the show. But he definitely had his voice in a state of decline at that point where it was limiting the effectiveness of his performances. And it was hard to grapple with that and kind of accept it. And he was using the various gimmicks to kind of cover up that fact, the up singing and the different kind of sing-songy approaches. But I think for people like us, we've seen him reach such heights as a performer that you never want to give up on the fact that he might bounce back. And I'm so glad that I didn't quit on Bob, because I can remember actually a moment in 2012 in a span of 10 minutes at a show, he barked his way through Highway 61 and it was so bad. And I remember thinking, maybe this is the end. Even if he's motivated to play up until the day he dies, maybe he's physically not capable of doing it. And the very next song, he played Visions of Johanna and he started singing again. And in a matter of literally 5 minutes, I went from, maybe this isn't worth it to this absolutely is worth it. He can still do it. And how dare me question that Bob still has this greatness down inside of him. And I'm so glad that I didn't quit, because like you said, I saw him reach those transcendent moments in 2014 and 2018, and even more in 2021. He's just as present and in the moment in his performances now than he's ever been. And I was in awe honestly, in 2021, I was in awe. You can hear me actually in the recordings of the show. Whooping it up.
Oh, sorry. Because I can hear it in your voice. I was going to say I can hear it in your voice. I must listen out for you. When can we? I hope you don't shout over Bob. That's not allowed.
No, I have good etiquette. It's all in between songs, in between singing, but you can definitely hear me specifically. I think it's actually the first time where the bootleg recorder must have been sitting in like the seat next to me, because you can hear my wife and I talking quietly. You can hear me say, do you think this is the last song before the main set is over? Like just like little tiny comments that nothing would have been picked up if it weren't literally the person sitting next to me.
Yeah.
But you can hear it in my voice maybe now and maybe even in the show
No,
that I am in awe of Bob still. So
yeah. I mean, actually, you moved me there, apart from in your emotion, you moved me in a way you probably didn't intend when you said you were trying to work out the set list, because of course I'd got used to, as we all had when the set list became the set. We got used to where everything was, and you knew what was coming next, and and it must have been great to be back in that position of not knowing again. That must have been wonderful. But I would like to say, to those people who do like 2005 to 2011, good on you. I would rather like it than not like it. And I'm sure you can make up great compilation tapes. And as you've just said, in the middle of it, you can switch to something else. And I do take quite a lot of flack from people who really, like that era. But if I saw them now, I'd say, well, look, listen to Chicago. You mentioned Chicago. You said, listen to Chicago 2021, and tell me, is I've made up my mind to give myself to you. Is that missing upsinging? Is Key West missing the Wolfman voice? Is that delicate, lovely end to Key West, that musical end? Is that missing a wham bam slam you bang rock finish that's been the same finish for the last 6 bloody songs for the last 6 bloody nights? No, it's not. It's not what it's missing. Part of the Tempest set is, I think, you had the absolute pile driver of Pay and Blood. You had the delicate singing of Soon After Midnight, which reminded me of Moonlight. You had Forgetful Heart being another big number in throughout those years, very carefully. So I think Tempest gave him a huge boost for the live set. I agree that it's developed even more since then. So I sort of see it and actually this is why I'm hoping somebody else brings out a book on it, because I've not followed it as intently as I have all the decades before. But to me, it falls into 3 main categories, which is the post-tempest lift, the crooning, which went on longer than any of us thought it would do. But if that's what's causing his voice, if that's what's brought his voice to where it is now, God bless it all. And in fact, I loved the shows then. The Sinatra songs were wonderful. Sinatra influence songs were wonderful when I heard them live. They were really great. I'd go and see him do that for the rest of my life quite happily. Though I'd rather see what you saw. And then in 2019, all kinds of interesting things seem to be starting to happen. I heard some great Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, and Lenny Bruce, which I'd written about because Dylan fans never seemed to like it. And then Richard Thomas wrote about, and then it came into Bob's set. So it was like a late revival for that. And I've always held a candle to that for that song, really. And those performances sounded quite wonderful to me. It's difficult to say now in 2021, even that seems so long ago now. Was that 2018, 2019 we played this? Anyway, so it's those 3 or possibly 4 sets now, because of course I haven't seen the new one, these blocks. And possibly it just seems to be getting better and better. But his vocals are extraordinary at the moment. I mean, you could not have predicted that in 2009. I mean, you could not. You just could not have. But he's bounced back so many times. I saw him in 1987, and he looked like we'd never see him again in London. I mean, really, he looked at the end of the road. And in 1991, in the first shows that year, again, it's like, oh my God, I'm never going to see him again. And then next year it was, Little Moses and Idiot Wind and gorgeous shows in Europe. It was just extraordinary the way he keeps confounding us. And I have actually seen him a few other times backstage, some of which is in the book. There was one great time in a show in Germany where we're backstage, and I didn't say a thing, by the way, in any of these cases backstage, because you weren't supposed to be there. So didn't see. And there was one great time when he came out of a door, having to hold the door open about an hour before the show started, and he had a dressing gown on and shorts, sort of boxer shorts, naked chest and everything, and he was carrying a tray of sandwiches. I think they were prawn sandwiches, but again, it's kind of looking at Bob. He was half made up for the show and half not. And a helper had gone out the door before him, and then just let the door swing back on Bob. So it's just like Bob struggling there in this state. And of course, you couldn't go and help him because you weren't supposed to be there. So there's been some other times, but Camden certainly takes the biscuit. Some of the credit for this goes to Lamb Chop, a legendary British fan who's in the book a great deal. For those who don't know him, it's worth reading the book just to find out about Lamb Chop. And that's not to sell the book, it just is. He was an extraordinary character. And he's the one that arranged for many of the British fans over all these years to get front row tickets or near front row tickets. And he did it by an enormous charm that he could turn on to people at the other end of the telephone line, or send them flowers and chocolates, which I thought was very silly, but then I utilized in this occasion. So I got hold of the press officer and some other office there, registration office or registry office, that had something to do with the tickets. There were 2 sets of tickets, public access, virtually none, because it's for families of people graduating. I mean, it was almost impossible to get tickets. And press office, well, you can imagine how many press officers wanted to be there. And what did I run? I ran a Bob Dylan fanzine. Now, this was the second fanzine. It was professionally produced and everything, but, there was the Times and the Washington Post. Everybody wanted to be there. So I put for 2 public access and for a press, and I used all of Larry's tricks that he told me over the years, all of them. The ladies in question were very, very generous with their time. I'm not sure which letter of mine eventually swayed them. The one saying how much it would mean to me to be there, or the one saying how much it would crush me not to be there. But I think the fear of a suicide on their hands perhaps swayed them, because as I say in the book, St Andrews is a big family connection for me anyway. But just the thought of Bob being in Scotland and doing this and me missing it was I just couldn't bear the thought. So it arrived, before it arrived, I got 2 public tickets, which were for me and my best friend. And this is a Scottish best friend, so that's a bit difficult for the rest of the world to understand. You don't really have a word for it. Nemesis is probably the closest you get. So me and my nemesis, Joe McShane, were going there. But of course, we wanted Duncan Hume, who you've interviewed on this very podcast.
And met him in Milwaukee. We finally met in person at the show in November, too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, great. He's a wonderful man, isn't he?
Yep.
But we're waiting on the press office one. And I didn't think it would come because it just seemed ridiculous that I would get it just running a fanzine. But as you know, I got it. So we all 3 of us got in, and we were so proud because we thought we were the only Dylan fans there. But we saw Mike Sutton, a long-term friend of Lamb Chop I've just mentioned. We saw him, which was good because it took away our smug pride in being the only ones there. Jim Callahan saw us and gave us, I think it was quite good for him to have somebody to keep his eye on, But the biggest thing of that was not actually the event taking place and Bob kneeling down and getting it, though all of that was wonderful. I mean, again, the get-up. In Camden, the get-up was good. The get-up in St Andrews was just extraordinary. So there was the whole event itself, which we had expected, though it was still gobsmacking. But then at the end of it, which we had no idea was going to happen, they walked past. This people with the honorary doctorates all came, read by Professor Neil Corcoran. They all came past us, right where we were sitting, close enough to touch. Bob, with his it was just amazing. And he's wearing this long cloak, and he's very tired because he's jet lagged from coming over from America. He's got a show that night. He normally would have been sleeping at this point, and he tripped on the long gown. It caught under his foot, and he tripped and he stumbled. And you can imagine how fast 3 of us, Joe, Duncan, and I, went to catch him. We're going to catch him and never let him go. Now I'm in my 60s. I've kind of lost, I've kind of just about stopped being a teenager. Well, just about. You can tell I've not really. But it's a strange thing. When I was at university, supposedly studying Shakespeare, all I did was listen to Dylan all the time. Now I'm getting to the retirement age where I should be kicking back and listening to Dylan. I'm studying Shakespeare all the time. Such is life. But I've always been very interested, and I've always seen a close connection because, nowadays people think of Shakespeare as being old-fashioned, but obviously he is from very far in the past. But people think of him as a revered literary figure that you study and everything else. But in his day, it was rock and roll. His theatres were in the rough part of town. There was in fact, they were outside the jurisdiction. It was gambling and vice and corruption, and it was as hated by the authorities as rock and roll, and as likely to lead to riots. And he was writing in that environment. Anyway, the main thing is page v stage. The great thing Dylan continually says, and people would still ignore this. To this day, people still ignore when he says this, that for him, it's the performing that's the thing and the art comes later. I was listening to a compilation of interviews, and it goes through his every decade he's mentioned this. That it's performing that's first and the albums are secondary. That people will insist on just not paying attention to him. And similarly with Shakespeare, for centuries people study him in a room with a candle or with a light and read him late tonight and work out these difficult things between words and all that. It was about getting on stage and giving people fun. That's what it originally was, and still is for me. So I wrote a book after One More Night on a particular live yearly festival in Cambridge, Shakespeare Festival. And having just written the book on live Dylan, the connections just exploded. And then I started investigating how the connections themselves. And then I noticed how often Dylan actually refers to Shakespeare. It's an enormous amount of time. In the book, I've got an appendix of like the important quotes, but it's only like 10% of them. There's loads more. And in fact, even now, after having written the book, I'm finding out more and more connections between them. There was something I mentioned that I should have really made a lot more of, which I'm writing on just now. But it's a similar thing. It's the thrill of seeing this. I mean, it is, of course, the words are fantastic. They are creative literature as well, but it's seeing them in performance and changing. It's not, it's changing every night. The King Lear you see is not the same King Lear. The Tangled Up in Blue you hear is not the same Tangled Up in Blue. And there are hugely variant versions of Hamlet. There's a 4-hour Hamlet and a 2-hour Hamlet. There's an 11-verse Desolation Row and there's a 5-verse Desolation Row. And I love them all. And I suppose I just go for the best. I mean, Shakespeare's the best and Bob's the best living. And Dylan himself has said, people won't know what I'm doing now till 100 years from now. And I'm quite willing to believe that. I'm quite willing to believe that, we're very much at the foothills of any knowledge on him. I don't see any problem with that. But I also think I'm glad we're here and we're documenting all these different things about them, so scholars of the future do have something to come back on. My one big worry is that to me, Dylan is only Dylan when Dylan sings Dylan. And, even Bob's not immortal, so he won't be there to sing them, and cover versions don't cut it for me, or with very, very few exceptions, because you need Dylan there performing them. Of course, we've got the recordings and everything else, but, I go and see a Shakespeare play now. That's what I'm supposed to do. I see a director's vision and an acting group do it, and that's what Shakespeare wrote for. And I'll go and see it next year and it'll be completely different. With Dylan at the moment, I'll go and see him and I'll go and see him next year and he'll be completely different. But there'll come a time when I can't go and see Dylan. And that's going to make Dylan in the future. I don't know how that's going to work out. But certainly for the Western world in the last 60 years, Bob's a colossus. You follow the great novelists of just now, many, possibly most, but certainly many of them reference Bob as their inspiration. Same with actors, same with playwrights. And I think that bit we don't really have a grasp on yet, because I think you need to go about 100 years in the future to look back and say, oh yeah, all of those people, all of those creative people look to Bob for inspiration. We know about it because we read magazines and we know it, but we can't get our head around it because it's so big. And I don't know what it's like. Even, I know you're saying you're beginning to feel one of the older ones. Let's imagine a youngster now. Let's imagine an 18-year-old discovering Bob now. I mean, wow, where do you start? I felt overwhelmed in 1973, getting all the 60s stuff. I mean, and that was just the albums. It wasn't the outtakes and everything. Where on earth would you start now if somebody said, oh, you like Bob Dylan? Here's my collection. I mean, my God, that's the next 50 years of your life just to hear them all once. My sister is very good to me in as much as she's 2 and a bit years older. So her class group were really mostly about 3 years older than me, which is a big thing at teenagers. The difference between 14 and 17 is kind of immense. But she always sort of insisted that her friends let me hang around with them, which was great. And they were forever talking about music, and the name Dylan kept coming up. And I began to read music press, and Dylan's name was just everywhere, but I didn't hear him. This would have been 70, 71, possibly going into 72. Going into 72. So anyway, the name was in my mind, but it wasn't what people were actually playing, although everybody was talking about it, which was kind of strange. And one of the things my sister gave me, I took and played when she wasn't in the house, was Elton John's Tumbleweed Connection, an album I used to really, really like. And I got a Melody Maker once, and it had a headline, Dylan Digs Elton. And I thought, who the hell does this Dylan think he is, that he's in the, why did they have to put his name? Can't they just say the album's good? God, had I a lot to learn. But that was him again. So I was in a record shop one day, to cut a long story short, and I wanted a Dylan album. And they had just changed the price of albums, so I couldn't afford the new one, which would have been, I think, by that point, either the album called Dylan. I don't think it was late enough for Pat Garrett. Anyway, I didn't have enough for the album, and self-portrait was a double, so it'd be more expensive. So I had to go for and the guy behind the counter said, well, all the older ones are discounted. Now, this is how little I knew. I looked at the older ones and I picked the most recent old one. So no Highway 61 Revisited or Bring It All Back Home for me. I got Nashville Skyline as my first album. And I liked it, but I didn't quite get, it didn't tie up with the things I was hearing. And then from the local library, I got Self-Portrait and then later the album Dylan. Those were my first three albums. I think Dylan was the third one. It was something around that time anyway. And I couldn't quite get it. You know, a boyfriend and my sisters came to visit the parents. You know what it's like, boyfriend visiting parents. I mean, it's just awful, isn't it? So I thought I'll try and make things better for them. And I said, we were in a room that only had a tape recorder, so all my vinyl was in a different room. And I said, do you want to hear some music? He said, yeah, what have you got? I said, oh, I've got a Bob Dylan tape here. He said, oh, brilliant. So I put it on and he didn't say very much. And I said, well, Self-Portrait this was. And I said, well, did you like it at the end of the side of the tape? And he said, well, yeah, but you know, his earlier stuff's much better. And then my mother, he said my family, my mother had gone to university as a sort of later in life. So she would be about 40 and her classmates would be about 20. And one of them had found out I liked Dylan. And what a generous thing to do. He gave her an album to bring home to me. And it was a rare batch of Little White Wonder, an Italian legal album, but you know, not legal anywhere else except in Italy. And on one side, it had early folk stuff, like Only a Hobo and Dusty Old Fairgrounds. A few years since I heard that. I used to love that. And on the other side, it had the band sessions from 65. And I just never heard anything like it in my life. It just, the entire world just changed in that instant. It's like my head exploded, as Bob said about something else. But it really was like my head. I had no idea what these words were. All I knew was they were great. I also knew that they meant something really important, even though I didn't know what it was they meant. You know, I agree with John Lennon. You don't actually need to know what Bob's saying. You just need to hear him saying it, and you know that you get the depth of meaning. But I liked both sides. I loved the folk side as well. But I just never heard anything like this surreal jamboree of names and images. And it was stuff I'd been studying at university in poetry, but here it was pouring out of my speakers. And that was it. I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. And then the next years, 2 years, brought everything up to that point, and then Blood on the Tracks came out. So it was like a mad rush. And by that time, I was buying bootlegs and getting Rolling Thunder Review the next year. Oh, it was, wow, it was wonderful. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, when the tickets were announced, it was mania. They had to put on Blackbush because there were so many people were making money on the black market selling the tickets for extortionate prices. But a lot of us felt we'd never see him. He'd only been over for the Isle of Wight, and I mean, there was this whole baby boomer generation who'd grown up Dylan fanatics, and there were a lot of Dylan fanatics, as I found out in Britain, and you know, Scotland seemed to be almost a particular hotbed, perhaps because of the folk connection. I don't know. I'm sure Ireland would say the same. And of course, there's a huge English fan base as well. And we felt we weren't going to see him. And the Rolling Thunder tour had kind of rubbed it in, because we got the bootlegs from the Rolling Thunder tour, and we just fabulous. And you didn't jump on a plane in those days and go to America to see him. It just wasn't done. Never even thought about it. And we thought we'd probably never see him again. I did. I'm always a pessimist in these things. So when it was announced, I was actually in a pub in Glasgow 3 days before the tickets went on sale, and there was a rumour that a queue had started. So I left the pub and I went to join the queue. And in fact, there were people there, but we got moved on. We got moved on the second night too. So I actually only slept out for one night, but it was one full day the night, and it was, I can't remember in many hours, but I was about 50 hours hanging around the queue. We got broken up by the police at one point. So I saw him 5 times at Earl's Court and once at Blackbush. You could only buy 6 tickets, and I was staying with somebody in London, so I got him a ticket. It never occurred to me to bribe somebody in the queue to buy another ticket. I don't know how much it would have cost, but it would have been worth it. Because that day when I was in London and Bob was playing and I wasn't seeing him was the worst day ever. But the first night, I was so worked up. I was actually possibly even more worked up than I was in Camden, if you can believe that. And it was actually possibly quite dangerous health-wise, because I went into the Earl's Court the minute the doors opened, which was hours before the show started. I never went to the toilet. Something I certainly couldn't do at my age now. But I never went to the toilet. I never took my eyes off the stage because it occurred to me that Bob might walk across. Now, why Bob might walk across when there was virtually nobody there, there was no equipment set up, why that would happen, I have no idea. But I convinced myself it was possible, so I wasn't going to move. I sat there for ages, and as it got closer and closer to time and the hall filled up, my nerves started to go. And I had phoned home just before outside to say, I'm actually there. I'm actually in the street where Bob Dylan is going to appear later tonight. Can you believe it? And I remember my mother said, you've got to remember, he's only human. And I thought, stupid thing to say. Clearly not true. And it got closer and closer, and my heart was going. And I suddenly decided he wasn't going to be there. I convinced myself he wasn't going to be there. I think it was self-preservation, because if I'd really believed he was going to be there, I'd have passed out, I think. So I convinced myself he wasn't going to be there. And then I convinced myself that was good, because at least I had been in the building facing the microphone where Bob would be. By chance, I had fairly close seats. I mean, it's an arena, so not very close, but fairly close seats. Proportionally close to most of the audience. And I thought Bob would have been there if they, I decided to cancel the show. And then time went on, and about 20 minutes passed, and the band came on, and everybody started to get ready. And I thought, nobody's told them Bob's not playing yet, So, and then he came on stage, and it was just heaven. I remember the first song because it was a cover, and it was just, he was there. And I remember Tangled Up in Blue, but this is a terrible thing to admit, but it's true, so I might as well admit it. I really don't remember anything else about the opening night. It was just a blur. Second night, I remember very, very well, because I knew I was going to see him, and I knew I was going to see him the night after that, and I got myself together again. It's quite embarrassing coming across like a hysterical teenager like this. I hope only other hysterical teenagers tune in. But, it was the single biggest thing in my life to that point. I could say it's the single biggest thing in my life to this point, but I'd get into trouble, wouldn't I? So the fanzine started in 1990. That was my first fanzine. But my tape collecting goes in two parts, actually, because there's the hardcore Dylan fandom that you're probably referring to later, where we're all swapping hundreds of tapes all the time and, doing complete years. Except for the occasional missing song from Turkey, which drove us mad in 1989 for about 3 years, but we got them in the end. But before that, I was trading tapes. So there were adverts in the New Musical Express. Send away £2.50 and get 4 Bob Dylan tapes back, and you could then swap them with somebody else or buy more. This was before I was into organised fandom. This goes back to the 70s. I was 77 people were buying bootlegs in London and bringing them back to Glasgow for me. And I was taping the bootlegs and swapping them with people who would tape other bootlegs and send them to me. So that wasn't organised fandom. That was just random Dylan fans dotted about the country. And then Dylan fandom really took off in Britain in a big way, but I'd gone to live in Europe by this point, and I missed it. But thankfully, some people think this is not a coincidence, but I had a younger cousin who turned out to be a Bob Dylan fanatic and indeed a tape collector, and who kept collecting tapes when I was away in Europe. So when I came back from Europe, he had them all for me. Andy Wright, God bless you. And he was with many shows with me as well, going through the Never-Ending Tour. So I had I had what most people would consider a far too large collection on one person, but was nowhere near real fandom. And then when I came back in the 80s, I'd missed the beginning of all the fanzines, and I wanted to start a fanzine of my own, as I had in my science fiction days. I've always wanted this. In fact, I got involved in teaching computing simply so I could have a computer and a printer to run a fanzine. I changed my whole job just for that. So I worked in computing for 15 years just so I could run Bob Dylan fanzines. I mean, it had other benefits too, but that was the main reason. 78 will always, seeing him for the first time will always be the sort of top one for that. So, but let's miss that out. Maybe jump to an 80, and I say 81 was absolutely fabulous. And I've got lots of personal ones. I loved seeing him in 89. I what Bob calls the never-ending tour band. The only one, the 88 to 90. I loved those shows. 88 is actually my favorite never-ending tour year, and I didn't see any show live because travel to America just wasn't thought about then. But ones that I've actually attended, the Hammersmith 90, because it was so, I'd never seen him so intimately close. Right pressed up against the stage with Dylan fans going crazy all round about me, Bob in just phenomenal mood and form.
Duncan mentioned that show too. Did you go with him to that show?
He was around me. We were all around each other. Yeah, probably. That was the show I had the ticket problem, so I wasn't actually in the front for everyone. But I was beside Lamb Chop, and Duncan would be near. They're very close by, and it was just amazing to see him so close. And that, in a way, was, although I loved the '89 shows musically, that in a way was the real beginning of the Never Ending Tour for me, with that closeness, being close to Bob, really, seeing him right in front of me, which was to happen so many times over the future years, but had never happened up until that point. Now, because a special show for me and my wife was Roseland, when, and I'm saying that
1994.
Yeah, 1994. So very romantic. I took my wife to New York for a week. It just so happened that Bob was playing every night, and we were staying in Greenwich Village. These things happen. I don't know how they happen. And a wonderful time, by the way. Everybody in New York was great to us. We went back another time. I was going to say without Bob, but I mean, it was a Bob-filled trip, obviously, but without the live shows. And again, everybody was wonderful. So we're having a really great time in New York. Fabulous. One of the best holidays I've been on. And it had Dylan into the bargain. Which of course puts it into the stratosphere. And at the end of the Roseland, Bruce Springsteen and Neil Young joined him on stage for the encores. Now, this is where I'm a hypocrite, because I've just said I don't like that, and normally I do anything else. But it made it a special night for us because it was our first time in New York. New York being so important for Bob, of course. I mean, to me, it's like seeing him in his hometown. I mean, I know it's Minnesota, which is possibly where you are just now, but there's something about New York and Bob, and it was a big thing for us to see him there. And next to Bob, Neil Young and Bruce Springsteen are probably the people we've listened most to together. Well, white rockers as opposed to blues musicians anyway, probably the two people we've most listened to. So to see them all on stage together was just capped off the holiday, as it were. So that was very good. I've also got individual moments, like when he played Lovesick in '97. That was Bournemouth the night before I nearly didn't make the plane to it. He was just back from his illness, and that had been a frightening time for us all. And that was a great moment. I remember jumping up, and as I came down, I right in the face. I sort of jumped up just out of sheer joy, and I sort of turned. Sorry, Bob, I actually turned away from the stage for a second. And I saw in the face of two well-known British Dylan fans, Phil and Ali Townsend. And their face must have been exactly what my face was like if I could have seen my own face. It was just sheer joy. So that was great. But, over the years, there's just been so many shows I've seen that have been fabulous. It's really difficult. It's like, let's ask you what's your favorite 5 Bob Dylan songs. You could pick 5, and then you could pick another 5 very, very soon thereafter. But I'd certainly like to see one just now. I'm trying all the way through the years. I mean, '84 at Wembley. You see, things happen for personal reasons. '84 at Wembley was 100,000. It wasn't one of Bob's best shows. Not that I thought that at the time. I thought it was absolutely the greatest thing ever. And in that 100,000, the Andy Wright, the cousin I'd mentioned earlier, I was going to meet him at the show. I think it must have been the first show we were at together. We'd arranged to meet. There had been terrible problems on the roads, and the buses had all been stopped, and he'd got there very late, and we couldn't meet him. And I knew he'd be all on his own at the gig, and it had been a big thing for us. I mean, Dylan had been a huge thing through both our lives together, and this was our first chance to see him together, and we weren't going to. And wandering around the stadium, we walked into each other. It's just unbelievable. So my sister and brother-in-law and myself were wandering around looking for a place to sit. And who's that guy standing there? Oh, that's my cousin. Oh, okay. And it wasn't long before Bob was on, so it was 100,000 people packed in. Not many people moving around because everybody was holding their position. So little things like that help. But there's loads and loads of things over the years. Also, Romance in Durango in 2003 was just completely out of the blue, out of nowhere. And it wasn't nothing wrong with Bob reading the lyrics, of course, but he read the lyrics. I mean, it was great of him to do that. Sorry, that sounded really ungracious. But it wasn't just Bob playing it and hearing it after all those years. It was the audience reaction. There was that gasp of astonishment where people all around, apart from one person who got it very early, I don't know who they were, but I credited them at the time. I was with Nigel Hinton, a guy who wrote on the cover of the first Telegraph fanzine, a wonderful writer in his own right. I was with Nigel Hinton, and I turned to him, and as I turned to him, because I thought I knew, I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't anything normal or anything we were expecting. And I turned to him with question mark in my face, and he was doing the same to me. And somebody somewhere in the audience got it and shouted. And there's no question they got it. You could tell by the glee in their voice. And then there was a pause. Everybody wondered what the hell he got. And credit to whoever it was, because it was really quick. There was this pause, and the pause extended a little bit, and it was everybody thinking, it's Romance in Durango. It can't be. Yes, it is. So before he actually gave the big cheer for yes, it is, there was that, no, it can't be, sort of thing. And I joked going in, somebody had shouted to me going in, we're going to get a surprise tonight. And I said, yes. It just seemed a nice thing to say. And he shouted back over a crowd to me, shouting, what we're going to get? And I said, as a joke, Black Diamond Bay. And it was actually, wasn't that
wow, that was
away.
Very close.
Yeah, but it wasn't any, it would have been completely false credit. But that was a great moment. And you get that sometimes. I mean, the Lovesick, I'm mentioning straight after seeing him being sick. It probably sounds cliche to other people, but it was a new album, and it was a great new album, and it was a whole new Bob Dylan. And he'd been ill, and seeing that and the audience reaction, it does. I mean, it does affect you. You're saying about objective and subjective. All of that plays in as well. You just mentioned 9/11 and then seeing him in New York. I mean, how much more context can you get? I was nearly crying listening to those tapes over here. I love Ring Them Bell. Oh, I love Nara City. That to me was a very special performance. I know it's not the Never Ending Tour as such, but it was in the middle of a Never Ending Tour. The Nara City, I loved that. I phoned Paul Williams, and he writes about it in his book. Excited Andy Muir on the phone.
Yeah, was that surprising in 1994? Because to me, that's one of his greatest vocal performances ever, and that stands high above what he was doing in '93 live.
It was absolutely staggering. It was knocked down because we had no idea he had that in him. And why? I mean, God bless him for all the shows he's done, but why hadn't he sung like that and all the hundreds of times we got to see him? And I think a lot of it was the setting. I mean, in the Never Ending Tour, and it is part of its joy as well, is that it's his band. They do exactly what he says, and he can be as idiosyncratic and as on-off as he wants. But there he was with top musicians. There was a lot of thing on him. He probably wanted to be top of his game or whatever. And what a game he pulled out! It's just staggering, and it's a great song. I mean, I think "Oh Mercy" is a seriously underrated album. I really do. And partly, of course, it's Rough and Rowdy Way's fault now, because everybody's saying how great that is, and people tend to forget the greatness in the past. This has happened all the way through my life with Dylan. That people will say, "Oh yeah, that old thing," when that old thing is actually a masterpiece as well. But "Oh Mercy" is great, and it deserves that voice. But what a voice, and what a hard rain's going to fall as well. That was, and the setting. No, that's way up there for me as well. Paul Williams was a friend for many years. Michael Gray and Clinton Halen were both friends for many years. I say were because I've kind of withdrawn from things. It's not that we're not talking or anything. Obviously, Paul's not with us. In recent years, I met Richard Thomas, I met him because of the two books we were doing, and I hope he wouldn't mind me saying I think he's a great friend now. And there's no one-upmanship. Well, there is a bit. Yeah, I've been taping, you've not. Like there is a little bit, but it's very good natured. I mean, all of the people are driven by a love of Dylan's music.
That's what I find. That's why I ask.
So really, what you said, I suppose at times there's a little bit of that, but the big thing is just the love of Dylan's music, and all of these people have given me insights into Dylan, and have given me Dylan's music that I don't have, and I've tried to do the same for other people. So no, overwhelmingly, it's a love of Dylan than anything else. But you can have flare-ups through the years. It was quite funny actually when I was living in London and running the Homer the Slut, the first fanzine. I had a post office box. I was living in Fulham. And there was a post office box, not a long walk away, about 15-minute walk, say. And then Clinton Halen, by complete chance, moved into a house halfway in between my house and the post office box. So one day I was Saturday morning, I was picking up all this mail for Homer, big sack of mail. It's great. I used to love all those letters. And I was coming home with it, and there was Clinton walking down the road with Dan Levy, who was running the bobdylan.com site. And it was like my whole world was Dylan. It was just wonderful days. And there was, so it was a bit, well, here I've got Dan Levy with me. It's a little bit of one-upmanship in that, I suppose. But it was all, this is good-natured stuff, But when you're talking about big collectors, I've got a tape you don't have. That's the trump card, isn't it? Not so much nowadays when everything's out, but in the old days it was,
But that's kind of the reason I do this show, is that I find that people who are interested in Bob's music to this degree just happen to be a really, on the whole, a really agreeable group of people. And we've all got this thing in common that's such a huge part of our lives. And, you know, when my wife and I and my kids are going to a show, we see dozens of people we know, and we're all there to do the thing we love to do the most. And it's almost always just a very happy environment, and a very positive experience to share something that all these people are so passionate about.
No, absolutely. And the scholars, as you call them, they're all fans too.
Yeah.
So they're all fans too, and they all want to hear the latest Bob, and they all want you to hear the latest Bob. And you know exactly what you said. I mean, I hope that comes across in the book, that I'm traveling across Europe, and I'm with great German friends, Christian, Stefan, Philau. You know, they don't understand why I've kind of dropped off the map now. They kind of think I don't love them. I love them greatly. They're a huge part of my life. I hope they listen to this so they hear that. But I mean, all right, you know, and all the people in the Netherlands, all the people in France who you'd see there, and you'd see them over in England, and you'd see them up in the shows in Scotland, and you just all these people, and it's just great to meet them, and so many Americans as well. No, it's a club, and the thing is, you're all having fun. You're all exhausted, of course. You're all absolutely exhausted, and you all want to be the one that's closest to Bob on stage, and you're all fighting for the best seat in the house. But other than that, everybody's friendly, and it's great. And the stories you get on tour are great. People just making it in time, all the kind of thing we're talking about, but multiplied by 100-fold. No, they're great times. You know, but it's a goddamn impossible way of life, as somebody once said. Well, when he catches you young, I mean, he caught you very young, but when he catches you as, you know, young enough, mid-teens, say in my case, it's so embedded in you as a person that really it's part of my whole life. I think one of the things is doing what you want and standing up for what you believe in and going your way. I mean, you know, I'm surrounded by other great literature that moves me greatly, and I don't need anybody to tell me that racism is a bad and evil thing. But it's nice to have a big brother figure who does. I know he doesn't like being called a big brother figure, but it's nice to have somebody who's been there and who knows life and who can show you. But most of all, I think it's just that voice that makes you want to go out and do things and explore and be. That's it, really. Bob's life.